We still have the same number of shares we had before this volatility occurred or this downturn. And you haven't, quote unquote, lost it until you.
To our loyal listeners from around the globe, welcome to the Top One podcast, where we delve into the minds, the hearts, communication, and the habits of the top 1% of financial advisors. I'm one of your hosts, Jerry Corless, here with my partner, Chaz Emerson. Chaz, how you doing today? But
Man, I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
it's good to be
How
here.
you doing today?
Man, I'm on top of the world. Couldn't be better. It is good to record this podcast, particularly now. The subject is timely. So today, listeners, we will be discussing advisor behavior in down markets. So it comes in the life cycle lots of times, actually, all advisors' careers. And there's definitely best practices and healthy ways to deal with down markets and proactive ways to deal with down markets for ourselves as advisors and also with clients in unhealthy ways. And I would say Chaz and I have experienced both.
Right.
Chaz, what are your initial thoughts? What counsel do you have for our listeners on this topic?
Yeah. So, as of right now, we're coming to the end of the first quarter and there's, talk of war and who knows what's going to happen, which the market typically becomes volatile. And so anytime you have volatility, we have unease, but also our clients have unease. We're going to kind of talk big picture, like where do I start the conversation and then what do I do during volatile moments? And so the first thing that I have here is setting the stage with the client. So with a new client, and you can do this with an existing client as well. But the way I do it is when I first have a relationship, we talk about our investment strategy, what we use, the asset allocation models, et cetera, and spend a lot of time explaining the importance of getting your risk tolerance right on the front end. Probably the most important function that we have if we don't serve as the investment manager itself. In other words, we outsource that to portfolio strategists, which is what I do. And those three roles, once we set the foundation for the allocation of the portfolio, which determines the majority of our return, and I talk about the three roles that we have. And I say, of course, you know that I serve as financial planner. That goes without saying. I always joke, marriage counselor as well. And of course, they laugh, because you're talking about touchy subjects when it comes to finances. And then the other one that you probably don't think a lot about is behavioral coach. And when
That's
I
right.
say behavioral coach, we don't want to make emotional decisions. So my job is to be a sound mind, to remind you of the decisions that we made on the front end and why it's so important to stay the course. And again, we don't want to make emotional decisions. So we're going to have volatility. We're going to have a market downturn if we work together long enough. It's not if, it's when. It's just part of investing. And I'm going to point back to this conversation. And I'm going to remind you how important it is to stay the course. The market has always come back. If it doesn't come back, we've got bigger problems than what our portfolio value is. And so the importance of thinking of it long term and getting that risk tolerance right on the front end. Any thoughts on that piece of it, Jerry?
No, couldn't agree more. Setting the stage appropriately. People can deal with almost anything if there have been appropriate expectations from the beginning. And a line that I heard somewhere along the way, and Chaz might have heard it from you, but is that risk tolerance doesn't change in a down market.
Right. That is
So,
exactly right. I say that.
and that's a great quote to give to a client in that foundational conversation is that it is critically important to understand that risk tolerance on the front end and that it doesn't change in a down market.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
absolutely. Having some sort of software or questionnaire to help determine the risk tolerance, I think, is an unbiased way to help the client determine that, at least as a starting point. And then when I'm talking to a client about an exact portfolio, I like to look at the calendar year returns. And for example, look at 2008 or 2020. I'm sorry, yeah, 2022, when we had some volatility and talk to them about what happened that year so they can kind of get a picture of we will have another year. And, 2008 is the worst we've seen in our lifetimes. We could never see that again, or we could. But it realistically sets the stage so that you can remind them when you get, you hit those volatile times. And this goes without saying, Jerry, but we need to be real with our clients. Like it's hard to stay the course. And we need to tell them, like, I know it's a hard thing to stay the course because our oftentimes our heads are different than our hearts. And what I'm going to be talking about is the heart of the matter. And it's been proven, and I'll talk about this like foundations, for example, or endowments, they don't make emotional decisions. It's not their money. They're detached. They know the right thing to do is to stay the course. And that's my job from a professional standpoint is to help you stay that course and not make knee jerk or emotional decisions. And here's one of the really important things. I was talking about this with a guy that works with me in my office is that we haven't lost until we sell it. Like your house value goes up and down every day. You just don't see it on a monthly or quarterly basis like your portfolio. And we just have to recognize we still have the same number of shares we had before this volatility occurred or this downturn. And you haven't quote unquote lost it until you sell it. And that resonates with people. I think they understand that.
No, I couldn't agree more. And Chaz, to your point, and you talk about the three different roles that they occupy. The argument could be made that the most important role an advisor serves is counseling clients appropriately through down markets because they don't have the education and the academic understanding that advisors have. And it's good for us to even get the reminders of that, but they don't have that information. Chaz, I think one of the things you're going to talk about is this time it's different, right? To them, that really feels that way. But you want to talk to our listeners a little bit about this time being different.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we talk about that, I've always joked that where I keep our keep, like in other words, like we're doing what's best for the client is keeping them in the market. Like, and you can't put your thumb on the dollar figure of what that makes up, but I think there was a study of the different percentages that a client makes up their fee from a client perspective, and I think that's it. But yeah, so one of the things I always tell my clients is it's different this time. There's a piece that shows the every downturn in the market
It was
history.
Time magazine covers.
Yeah,
Remember that
that's
old
it.
piece?
Yep, yep, and it shows the Time magazine covers, and it's titled, "It's Different This Time," and it's not different this time. Now, something else will trigger the market downturn, but it's still the same thing, and it always comes back, and so it's just a reminder of clients of although it may be a different economic reason or political reason that's causing the correction of the market, it's really not different this time.
No, that's right. And some of those, I remember that particular piece. That was back in our younger days that an investment group had put together. Some of those Time magazine covers had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so think back to that type of uncertainty, global uncertainty. Black Monday, just major events in time where people certainly thought this is really different. Something like this has never happened before since the market's been going. And
Yeah,
yet,
had like World War II, Desert Storm, all these different things that
and
are
looking in
eating
our own
all.
time, it was 2008. We saw iconic financial institutions and
Yes.
massive US corporations failing. And for me personally, and I know we're going to talk about a little bit of our own mental and emotional management, it was terrifying. And it did feel different that time. And
Oh,
yet, some perspective is that either it does recover at some point. If you have a globally diversified portfolio, either it recovers at some point or it's the end of times.
exactly. This is exactly right. There's no doubt about it. And the thing is, I think what I point to when I talk about that piece is don't overreact. Don't overreact. One of the things I wrote down, Jerry, is being proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, yeah, and I don't have an exact number here, but around the point that the market's down 10 plus percent. I make it a habit to proactively spend a couple of days or more and call all my clients. And a lot of times you're just leaving a voicemail, but just leaving a voicemail and I know we're talking to them and saying, hey, I know the market's a little crazy right now. Just wanted to remind you the importance of staying the course. It's going to be okay. If it's not, we got bigger things to worry about. But, and I'll have some bullet points on what's going on and it's a really simple, straightforward conversation. And almost every time when I do have them on the phone, they say, "Thank you so much for calling. I feel so much better now." Or they'll say, "Man, I really appreciate you calling. I didn't even realize that the market was down that much." You know what I mean? And that's okay too. But they appreciate the proactive nature of it, and that they know that you care and you're reminding them of the importance. So even if it goes down 20 or 30%, proactive once it hits around that 10% mark, I think it's really important. And so we're going to talk about other pieces, Jerry. And one of the pieces is like from a compliance approved standpoint that we'll talk through is the intra-year market volatility. And your average year has a 10+% downturn or correction or pullback, however you want to term it. And so just reminding people that having volatility like this is normal. Well, oftentimes the market will take one step back to take two steps forward. It's not always that way. Sometimes it may be three steps back and then four steps forward. We just don't know. But just reminding people that volatility is normal, especially now. Man, human nature, we are so short sighted that we forget. We've had three really good years in a row, and people forget about the volatility that we've experienced previous. And so it's always good to remind folks about that. And think like COVID is an market was down over 20%, but by the end of the year, it was positive. Think 2022, that's when the interest rate, they finally started raising interest rates, almost did too little. I mean, too much too fast. They waited too long to increase interest rates, in my opinion, which caused the worst performance we've seen in the bond market at the same time that the stocks are correcting. And so you had a double whammy there. Even a diversified portfolio had a pretty significant pullback in that year. So, and I point to those things. And it's not different this time, although something different is happening.
Right. Yeah, and one thing I want to point out to Chaz and all the things that you're saying here is this theme of proactivity. So as we talk about the mind, the hearts, the communication, and the habits of the top one. If you want a takeaway here is the mindset and the habit of the top 1% of advisors. It's really the leadership principle. They recognize where there's conflict or consternation and they move to it and they communicate about it as opposed to hide from it, right? They keep in mind the truth that I'm one potentially difficult conversation away from actually peace for me and peace for the client.
That is exactly right. And I do think, in my experience, that most advisors don't have that proactive response. And so
We're
you're
different.
really setting yourself apart. And I actually historically have used it as a prospecting tool as well. So, for example, I've got someone that I know would be a great client and they're experiencing this volatility. I'll call them and check on them and say, "Hey, I know we talked about your portfolio. We talked about doing a financial plan. I know there's a lot of uneasiness right now in the country and world and market, and just didn't know if it'd trigger like maybe us sitting back down." And those are the moments, and they're not hearing from their other advisor. Those are the moments when you're really setting yourself apart. So it's a great prospect. But a lot of times I'll do like I built relationships with a lot of those people I was trying to get as clients over time. Your best clients, at least in my experience, oftentimes can take 2 or 3 years to actually get them to pull the trigger to become a client. And
Right.
so, that it gives you that proactive opportunity to reach out in a moment that they may not be hearing from their advisor.
All right. So far, what I got from you, Chaz, is number one, just foundationally, you're setting appropriate expectations on the front end.
Yep,
Full, high quality risk tolerance assessment at the
yep,
beginning of the portfolio with the understanding that this is your risk tolerance in good markets and in down markets. And then when the inevitable down market comes, you're being proactive. So you're reaching out by phone. Maybe that's a 10% down market. There's some sort of trigger there, but you take a couple days and you're proactive in verbal communication. What else do you have for our folks?
Yeah,
Good
one of
stuff.
the other things that I do, it's automated, is I send a weekly email, and it's just a weekly update on what's going on in the market, and it's a way to have 52 touches with your clients without having to do anything. Now, of course, you have to subscribe to something that's compliance approved and all that good stuff, but it mine at least has it's not strictly market driven, but it does, comment and talk about market, but also has financial planning things, topics in there as well. And I think it's a way for people to know what's going on, and they also, I think, know that you're continuing to educate yourself and wanting to educate the client as well. And so that's something that I think you can be proactive in that's really it's systematic, it happens automatically, but they
Yeah.
know you're still there.
No, that's right. And how many of your clients actually read those things, right? It's probably a pretty low percentage, but it's meaningful to them. And it's just one of those signals that, hey, I'm paying attention, and
That's it.
it's another touch point that can definitely be comforting to folks.
Totally, and then once again, Jerry, having people that are prospective clients on that list. Oftentimes they'll respond to that and say, "Hey, I know we talked a couple of years ago. Appreciate you sending me these emails. I'm ready to sit down again." And a lot of times it happens during those downturns.
Percent.
One of the things I have written down here, Jerry, is thinking about our emotional and physical
Right.
well-being.
Yeah.
And man, I think about some of the moments we've been to, in particular 2000, and it is extremely stressful. And like I take it so personally, less so the older I get, but when I was younger, man, the emotional toll it took on me emotionally, but also physically, the stress of it. And I think we need to be aware of that and taking care of ourselves. And so some of the things that I wrote down, I do think reading, but not reading news outlets,
That's right.
reading actual economists or actual portfolio managers, talking to them, listening to what they think is going on, looking at the economic indicators, like the actual data, not what the news outlets are saying. I think that's really important so that you're realistic. Continuing to work out, take care of yourself physically, giving you that outlet, I think is really important. I think speaking to your peers about what are you doing? How are your conversations going? What are some of the bullet points you're talking about? What approved pieces are you using with your clients? And then just bottom line, don't freak out. It's not the end of the world. I know I mean, it's like a weight when those corrections happen. And I honestly would rather see my own portfolio go down than my client's portfolio. But we're the ones that have to be there to keep them from jumping off the bridge and making a knee jerk or an emotional decision. And so we've got to be of sound mind and take care of ourselves, get plenty of sleep. And look, we can't control the market. And our clients know that, but what we can control is the way that we react to it.
No, 100% agree. And I listen, so our listeners know the authenticity of these comments. In 2008, I literally had chest pains.
Yeah.
And I it did feel to me like this time it was different. There were names like Lehman Brothers, right? And major airlines. And so I think that there are some of the things Chaz mentioned, should absolutely be practices, specifically having the academic and the historical information ourselves as advisors. That equips you. And I think the way you got to think through these things are really is like two sides of it. One is the logical side. That's where you pursue information. Listen, you can go to any vendor and they're going to have really high quality pieces. Now, in order to use them with your clients, you need to get them approved through your channels, through your broker dealer or RIA or both. But even just for yourself, to have the academic understanding of like, hey, what does the history look like here? How long have these typically lasted? Under what conditions? What was the recovery period? Having that solid logical academic foundation is good for us. And then there's also the perspective piece, right? To be aware of, right? Because, in the humans, we've got that kind of quantitative side that's academically based, but then we also have this fear of the unknown. An advisor can quickly move from a space of fear about the market to fear of losing clients. And your own, even if the market recovers, am I going to lose my clients because of this? And what's my reputation going to be like? And will be okay financially at the end of this? And that's where we have to get into the emotional management. What is our identity? What are really our temporal and eternal strongholds? And then what habits? So bring ourselves into a state of perspective. And that can be, for us ranging and including all of prayer and good rest and exercise and as Jazz mentioned, also collaborating with other advisors. But, just being proactive in engagement too and addressing our own feelings. What's a rational fear and what's an irrational fear and really turning that side off. So choosing to have the right behaviors and the right thoughts during those time periods so that we're in a solid position to lead others, lead the clients through that time period. So
Yeah, that is
definitely some
exactly right.
definitely some
Couldn't have
thoughts there.
said it better myself. I always joke, not to over spiritualize the conversation, but I always joke that I think the good Lord put me in this business to remind me I'm not in control. And
Yeah.
that's the way it is with the market. I think just a couple of summary points, but I think just thinking about reminding clients you haven't lost until you've sold it. I cannot tell you how many times I've said that to clients. You actually haven't lost until you sell it. Then you're triggering the loss officially at that point in time. be willing to have the hard conversations and push people. And one of the things I'll do in those conversations, and if it's a client that was investing back in 2008, I'll ask them like, "What did you do during 2008?" "Well, I sold, and I wish I hadn't." I was like, "Okay, that's where we are." Or, "I didn't sell, and I'm really glad I didn't." Exactly. This is a similar example of what we're going through now. I know you're closer to retirement than you were then, and you have less time to recover, and that's why we've adjusted your allocation over time. That's why we have you in the allocation that we have you in now. You know what I mean? And so you point back to those examples. I think it becomes more real with people when you give them real life examples versus, just trying to talk from an academic standpoint.
Hey, Chaz, speaking of that though, you mentioned like your automated weekly email that you already have going out.
Yep.
In times like that, where let's say the market's down 15 and maybe it gets to 20 and maybe it gets to 25. Are there any times where you may be using some vendor approved pieces, with clients so that they can also do some reading for those types of clients that might do that?
Yeah, very rarely. If it's a piece that's really, I think, gonna resonate with the clients, I will do a one-off email. But what I'll do in that automated email, I have the ability to customize it. It's still approved, but I customize it and then it's approved. And I'll put in something along the lines of, and a lot of times I'll be real short and sweet. No, there's a lot of uneasiness going. If you want to talk, please call me. I'll be proactively reaching out. And I send that in that blanket email and, let people know that I'll be reaching out, and I think I'll get responses from that of people saying like, "Well, thank you. I know you're looking out for me. I'm not worried about it," or, "Don't worry about calling me. Call your other clients." Here's the ironic thing, Jerry. When I'm proactively making those phone calls, oftentimes my clients say, "Well, I thought about calling you, but not to check on the market. I know we talked about staying the course and I'm good, but how are you doing?
Yeah, that's right. It's
I've
really
been
nice.
worried about you." My dad always calls us like, "Son, how you doing? I know this is stressful on you," you know? And, it's good that people care about you and your well-being as well. I think that's when you've got a really good relationship with your clients when they're worried about you, you know what I mean? And I often have those conversations.
And listen, I think it's a time too where, and this is for everybody really sit up in our chairs and think about it. But this is the time where clients do make changes, or after down markets, when
Absolutely.
clients make changes,
Yep.
when they've had insecurity, when they had fear of the unknown of what's going to happen, and they didn't get proactive contact. That's all. Very often a time where they'll be having a conversation with a friend of theirs that's going to refer them to their advisor that was proactive. It's a really big topic. Chaz, I'm going to summarize and then you can advise if you have anything else and we can call this one a set. You mentioned number one, and I agree wholeheartedly, setting appropriate expectations at the onset of the relationship about what your role is, what will inevitably occur with their investment portfolio and what your role and just advising them in advance what your behavior is going to be and the importance of that. And then also in that same time period while you're onboarding that client, you really take time to go through a meaningful high quality risk tolerance assessment so that you have an appropriate allocation, and that's even something that you can refer back to in turbulent times with the client as a reminder.
And that your risk tolerance doesn't change during a down market.
That's right. Third, you mentioned being proactive. Whatever the metric the advisor may choose, maybe it's being down 10%, maybe it's just the gravity of the news of what's going on at the time. But there's some metric, some marker where the advisor makes a decision to be proactive with verbal communication. So reach out to clients, be on the phone, take a couple days, whatever it takes to just give that personal touch and answer people's questions during those time periods. Fourth, you mentioned that you have some automated systems as well that help. Specifically, you have a market commentary email that goes out that you can even edit to adjust for current market conditions. For those that will read, and it's also just another comforting touch point. And then you also talked about being careful to manage our own mental and emotional states by our own academic understanding, as well as just good, healthy habits and perspective giving activities during down markets. So, really good stuff, buddy. Anything else that I missed or that you think our listeners need to hear?
One other thing that came to mind that I will talk about with my clients, because our clients are looking at usually the SP 500 or the Dow. That's what their frame of reference is. And so oftentimes they'll talk about how the market's down. And sometimes I'll even ask, well, which index are you looking at? and they'll say the S&P 500 and let's say it's down 20%, and I'll pull their portfolio up and they're, let's say they're moderately invested. I'll say, well, the good news is, although the S&P 500 is down 20%, remember we have 40% in fixed income and 60% in equities, but they all aren't S&P 500 equities. It's diversified over international and other classes. And so we're down 11% instead of 20 or whatever. I'm just making up percentages. And I can't tell you how many times that conversation when I have it, they're like, "Oh, that's awesome." They're still down, right? Relatively speaking, but it helps them understand the importance of the diversification and that we did set their risk tolerance in a way that was appropriate, et cetera. So it's good to have those dialogues and to not always reference the market, but their actual circumstances.
They're weighted indices that are in their
Exactly.
portfolio. That's a great word.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I have here is I'm glad that you got your grass cut. It was good to hear the lawnmower and blower going in the background there. Apologize to our listeners for that.
Mute.
It's all good. I'm glad you aren't cutting your own grass anymore. Information like we talked about on the previous podcast.
All right, everyone, we're at time. Chaz, great information. Y'all have heard from the mind and the heart and the communication habits of the top one on down markets today. And we all use it well during this time. Chaz, thank you very much. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, everybody.